Not dead yet. We're back after a brief hiatus. We are here again, Johnny, Josh, to talk about how we still hope civics ain't dead, even though it's on its, I don't know, dying breath some of these days, it seems like. But for posterity's sake, we're recording this in August 2025, after our summer recess. And tonight we're going to be talking about power, and kind of the raw power politics that have taken over our current world, and especially American politics. So we're calling this the corrupt bargain. We'll talk about the historical context of that phrase in a minute, I think. But for now, really what we're getting into here is power politics. And kind of how, at least the way I see it, Josh, I think the way you see it, the current iteration of the GOP under Trump seems to be very inclined to grasping power, and perhaps foregoing principles or any kind of guardrails at that power, which I know doesn't seem like a earth-shattering premise to probably most people listening to this, but the thing I find ironic about this, the reason I kind of proposed to Josh that we talk about this, is because I can remember sitting in grad school not that long ago, and this used to be a critique of the left, right? That the left cared about power over principles, and that, people, this was a real talking point during the Obama years, right? That Obama, executive overreach was a thing that got levied at Obama a lot. He had a lot of executive orders, and all that the left cared about, all that the Dems cared about at the time was holding on to power, even, against policy or even against principles. So this is an old criticism against liberals that goes all the way back at least to FDR, I think. But I find it ironic that it is now the Republicans who clearly, to me, fall in this category of forsaking principles for the sake of holding on to power, or being enthralled by power. And I've got two quotes here, Josh, to kind of start us off to get at what I'm trying to say here. So, in the old telling, conservatives or the GOP were supposed to be the morally rigid ones, right? Like, think about the way they go after Clinton in the 90s for his, after hours activities, right? But it's moral rigidity, it's principles. This is what supposedly was supposed to guide the GOP when I was a boy growing up. And the left, cared about power. And this was still a thing. The Republicans still talked about this when Trump was first making his run in the primaries in 2016, right? So Marco Rubio, right, who's now working for Trump in the State Department. In 2016, he was opposed to Trump. He was a competitor in the Republican primary, and he saw Trump as a potential strongman, right? So his whole spiel, this is from a New York Times interview he did in 2016 when he was still in the running. He said that we must recognize that our nation is a global leader, not just because of its superior arms, but because of its superior aims, right? And then he goes on to criticize Trump specifically, right? That most countries around the world that are failures, it's because they deposit their hopes in one person, a strong leader who comes forward and says, put me in power and I will make the country better. Marco Rubio says in this interview, that's exactly what Trump's doing. The rhetoric of Trump reminds me of a third world strongman. Okay, so third world strongman, J.D. Vance, right? Another, Republican intellectual who at one point was anti-Trump, said that Trump could be potentially America's Hitler. But of course now he's jumped sides and he's the VP, right? And he's full on MAGA, full on Donald Trump's water boy. So those are just two examples, but we can think of many examples, I'm sure, in state level politics, in all of these Republican senators and congressmen and critics of Trump who have now, for lack of a better term, bended the knee, right, to this administration and to Trump specifically, kiss the ring, if you will. So those are our two, what I'll say, pungent examples. But my question here is, are these men, is the GOP more generally, are they giving in to Trump? Are they kissing the ring of Trump because they've had a change of heart and they actually, kind of have done about face? They think Trump is better than they thought he was at one point? Or is this just a cynical assessment about power and that Trump brings power to the GOP, therefore we have to fall in line behind Trump and do what he says? Because that sure is what it looks like to me, right? But again, I'm a skeptic of all these guys. So are they all sellouts for Trump? Or do you think that, like the way JD Vance puts it now, well, he sat down with Trump, he thinks Trump's the real deal, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
I,
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, you'd have to do an examination, I think, of each individual politician. But by and large, I think, yeah, they've sold out. Just sticking with Rubio and Vance to start, I mean, there's plenty of video footage online of Rubio's body language and forced laughter when he's around Trump. That, I'm no psychologist, but it sure seems like his soul left his body, and he's uh, grappling on a daily basis, even a minute by minute basis, with his decision to ally himself with Trump. Perhaps you could say, in his defense, he understands, and he's probably right, that if it weren't him doing the multiple jobs he's doing right now, there'd be someone worse. And that's probably true. And so in his mind, I'm guessing he thinks, you know, at least I can be to a certain extent, a guardrail against some of the crazier stuff that Trump says to do, at least abroad.
well,
But
yeah, I mean, because the alternative examples, right? The Kristi Noems, the Pete Hegseths, the Pam Bondis, right? These are all MAGA followers from way back, and they don't actually have any real expertise in statecraft, and therefore you could make the argument that uh, Marco Rubio, better than Pete Hegseth, right? And you saw that even the way that the Senate and Congress, um, well, the Senate confirmed Marco Rubio, right? It was a unanimous confirmation as opposed to these much more fractious ones. I think even Democrats were relieved at someone like Marco Rubio being, you know,
and I remember being surprised because I think Rubio was the first one announced of his cabinet, and
yeah,
kind of the understanding going into this election was that, Trump won. He did surround himself with a lot of competent individuals who had decades of experience, and the argument you could make was, yeah, Trump might be kind of megalomaniacal, but he'll be held in check by all these other people. And then they fell off by the wayside one by one, and denounced kind of his approach
yes,
to politics, and disowned him. And then the understanding going into Trump too was, well, now he's probably going to surround himself with a bunch of nut jobs.
yeah,
And then he announces Rubio, and everyone's kind of thrown off guard because you might like or not like Rubio, but he's at least an established politician with, as you said, some expertise and some ability to conduct affairs of the state. Um, After Rubio, then we got more of what you kind of expected,
yeah,
with the RFKs and the Hegseth and so
yeah,
forth.
right,
But Rubio, I think, yeah, that's probably the logic there. Um, with Vance, uh, I would say with him, he probably sees himself as a heartbeat away from the presidency.
yeah.
And again, he probably deep down kind of still loathes Trump, but is much more opportunistic about his own political career, you know.
Yeah, well, but so Vance might be a good example then for the broader party problem, right? Or what the if we're going to diagnose this, it's calculations towards power that allow them to kind of hold their nose and go along with Trump, even if some of the stuff Trump does is on principle against what a Republican lawmaker might be against, right? So, like tariffs run totally counter to free trade economics, right? But if Trump keeps them in power, maybe they go along with that part, right? Um, there are other more heinous examples than tariffs, and we can talk through some of those here in a minute, but ones that actually threaten democracy, right? But I think that that's what these people are up to, right? If they're not full on MAGA, if they are career Republicans, I guess it's a calculated decision that Trump keeps them in power longer than not. Um, and
Yeah.
so they're willing to look the other way at some of these principled questions that they, you know, in any other context would claim to be against.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting feature of 21st century American politics that the party lines are so rigid. If you rewind 50 years, the percentage of people in Congress who would, vote in tandem with what the president wanted was, I don't know, but much lower than 99%, right?
Yeah,
Like, whereas today, it's a surprise if one senator or representative on either side is kind of going against the party line. So there is a certain sense that politicians are wary of their constituents and the stranglehold that MAGA and Trump, as this larger than life, almost cultish figure, has
mm,
on the right side of American politics. And there's the fear that if they go against the grain even for one vote, in the age of social media and constant news, they're going to be outed as
fake
against the party.
nose. Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. Well, it's happened. We have had prominent examples of this, whether it's, Mitt Romney deciding to kind of hang it up, or
Liz Cheney.
Liz Cheney getting forced out of the party essentially for countering Trump, and then all of the resignations of people who just couldn't stomach it anymore, right? So like the Jeff Flakes, um, uh, the ones that have announced now that they won't run again. I'm trying to think of his name in North Carolina, but
Mm, yeah, maybe.
Tillis, yeah. But
Tom Tillis.
yeah, so all that's a spectrum of people who have been pilloried for not falling in line with dear leader, So that is a thing for sure.
I mean, it's also worth mentioning that a lot of the selections Trump made, at least for his cabinet, kind of have a built-in fealty to him already because of some past transgression. I mean, you think of Pete Hegseth. What is Pete Hegseth going to do to stand up to Trump? I mean,
Right. Yeah.
if and when that ever happened, which I don't think it will, he'd be the first to go. And there's a
Yeah.
million and one reasons why.
Yeah.
One being that he's not qualified in the slightest bit to do the job he's currently tasked with doing, which we've seen, in a number of different ways. But there's a reason behind a lot of these high-profile selections of former Fox News talking
Yeah.
heads, for example, that we didn't see in the first administration, and I think Trump would say was a mistake on his part in actually putting competent people around him who could
Right.
stand up to him.
He'd prefer loyalists. Yeah. Yeah.
And you
Well.
see, I
Yeah.
mean, just with the candidates that the GOP is selecting in any race. I mean, think of Dr. Oz, for example.
Right.
He's not a legitimate candidate. And
Right.
so even in just kind of everyday normal, races in a certain state I mean, for governor or for a congressman or a senator, there are more and more kind of tried and true MAGA people who have that built-in kind of fealty already.
Well, yeah. I mean, I can think of the Ohio example right now is the ramping up for the governor's race, right? So Mike DeWine, who is this old school Republican governor, but was accused of being a rhino because of his pandemic, enforcement, and because he doesn't fall in line with Trump. He's retiring, right? He's old. Um, and so Trump has already deigned that Vivek Ramaswamy is going to run as the MAGA governor candidate in the Republican primary. And so in the meantime, Mike DeWine has tried to line up a counter, to Ramaswamy, and his counter is Jim Tressel, the old Ohio State football coach, right? The hope is that this Ohio appeal is somehow going to counter the MAGA appeal. But that is a perfect example of this, like, Vivek's barely an Ohioan, right? He just moved into the state at Trump's behest to run for governor. And yet, and he's got no qualifications to be governor, right? Or very few. And yet, that MAGA hold is going to potentially push that power candidate through. And, the old GOP of Ohio can't do much about it, let alone the Democrats of Ohio. So we'll see what happens. And that's playing out at state level positions, in every state, I think, right now, or most states where it's contentious. That's good. Yeah. But that's one aspect of this, is that, you kind of get on the bandwagon to win, and that MAGA candidates are winning right now. But the other element that, I want to highlight is there's clear examples of this beyond just winning electoral races, right? So when I talk about raw power politics, there are ways that Trump is doing this that are beyond the pale of, hardball politics and electoral victories, right? So he's had these tendencies for a long time. The 2020 election, right? We saw this when he questioned the election results, but even in the midst of the, confusing days after election day, when he calls up Georgia Republicans and he tells them, find me 10,000 more votes. And they basically say, we can't do that, sir. Right. Those are great guardrails. Those are great principles that someone had then. But now, I'm not sure if those guardrails are there anymore. And Trump seems to be very keen on kind of pushing those boundaries and every advantage he has, right? So, the example that's fresh on my mind is the Texas one, where he wants a mid-census redistricting of Texas to get 5 more seats out of Texas, right? And he says this out loud. He calls the governor and he puts pressure on the state legislatures to redistrict to get him 5 more Republican-leaning seats, so that he potentially doesn't lose the House in the midterms. I mean, that's, pretty raw, real politics stuff, right? Fringing on anti-democratic, authoritarian, whatever you want to call it.
I mean, I would say it's fringing. I think that's pretty high up there in terms of like just basic authoritarian tactics.
Yeah.
A mid-decade census,
Yes. And
in which undocumented immigrants are not counted.
That's right. Yes.
That is so authoritarian. It surprises me after doing this stupid podcast for 6 months.
Yeah. Well, and it's bald faced, right? Like, Trump has said why he wants this done, because he wants 5 more seats. The Republicans in Texas have said why they want to do it, to give Trump 5 more seats, right? So they're not even trying to couch it in any kind of logical explanation that, the population's boomed, or there's been a lot of movement, or there's no, they're blatant about gerrymandering here.
The mask is off, and he's said openly this is because of the 2026 midterms.
That's right. Yeah.
And they're concerned that they're gonna, lose control of at least the House.
Yes.
If Trump and the administration had a more positive view of the American populace and their ability to understand what's going on, they would at least couch it in something more kind of lofty, like you said about population boom or something. But
Something,
there's
yeah.
no attempt to deceive people. It's almost it's
Right.
shockingly honest.
Well, and it's ironic the way you say it, right? Because that is the compliment people always give Trump is like, well, he tells it like it is. Like, yeah, he's telling you he's going to screw you before he screws you.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know that that's a positive, right? But
yeah,
I guess that's what I mean when I mean talking about raw power politics. Is it's the blatant, you know, there's no couching. There's no, we're doing this for your own good. There's none of that. It is just, I want to do this. We're going to do this. Doesn't matter if it's fair. Doesn't matter if it's just. Doesn't matter if it's constitutional, right? I mean, there are plenty of other examples of this kind of raw power. Um, I don't know. It's so that is that is a hallmark of Trump and Trumpism. It's certainly a hallmark of this second administration, um, for sure. And the GOP seems more and more okay with just letting that happen, and even being accomplices in it.
yeah. The question I posed to a family member a couple months ago was, is there a line that Trump could cross where you'd say that's too much, that's a bridge too far,
Yeah,
and I never got a response. But no, I don't think there is a line. I mean, I think we've gotten there a number of times already. I think you and me speaking off camera a dozen times about January 6th,
yeah,
we're probably both
that's
thinking as we
the
watch
line.
that
Yeah,
unfold on live TV, well, okay, at least this is the end of Donald Trump.
right.
And I think Mitch McConnell probably thought the same thing. I thought Kevin McCarthy, I think he probably thought the same thing. I think a lot of Republicans were like, well, at least now Trump's going to be done. And you had that sense in the immediate aftermath that a line had been crossed.
Yeah,
And then you saw the slow kind of ideological buildup of a defense, in multiple ways. Downplaying it as not that big of a deal. It was peaceful. Don't believe the rhetoric too. Um, well, the election really was stolen, and these are patriots. To any other number of things. So for a lot of people, I think that line being crossed was January 6th. Um, but even with this current kind of past 6 months of activity, you've seen the open defying of court orders, time and again. And, you know, we hear a lot, that's a feature of the administration, not a bug. Um, his supporters would say, well, every president, puts through, you know, executive orders that they know are going to be challenged in court, and they just kind of are testing the waters. You can think of Biden with the student loan uh,
yeah.
dismissals,
Forgiveness. Yeah,
and that was challenged, and he was told that's not really constitutional the way you're trying to do it. And then the administration was like, okay, well, we'll bite off a much smaller parcel of the really egregious stuff and just focus on that and not do a blanket dismissal for everybody. And they work within the framework of the Constitution and the system of checks and balances. That is so far. It's so different from the kind of rampant and extreme open defiance of every court order that comes back and says you can't do this, it's not constitutional.
and then the mocking, right, of towards the judge or towards the whatever the court is that finds this, right. So it's open defiance, and again, the bald face, blatant method that he kind of, or that the administration uses on that is, it's shockingly different, right.
And then the subsequent threat to remove that judge
Yeah,
for going against him.
right.
um, I mean that the court orders are just one example. We've seen in two major American cities the kind of federalization of troops in Los Angeles first in June, and now recently, and still
See,
ongoing in DC. Uh, that's just something that, in my mind, it's kind of testing the waters and trying to normalize the idea of a police state. So down the line, if there needs to be a police state to do something more nefarious, it doesn't seem like such a big deal. But I mean, if it's hard to even describe how that's a raw paragraph. It's just like you have American troops in American cities,
Trolling as policemen. Yeah.
right? That kind of defies explanation as anything but a raw paragraph. And then you also have the weaponization of the DOJ. I mean, any political opponent of Trump is under threat of attack. Any law firm that supports his political opponents, any news
Media.
outlet that
Yeah.
says something unfavorable, is going to be threatened with a lawsuit. It's it's rampant, and as we've heard said time and again, it's a feature, not a bug, of the current administration.
Well, back to your conversation with your family member about the line that Donald Trump would have to cross to lose support with them, right? Um, this gets us back to this kind of question of power politics and what's in it for Republicans and what's in it for Trump. And so Epstein, right? This is the big, supposed to be the big news story of the summer that hasn't yet gone away and yet also hasn't boiled over. And this idea that there's this client list that the DOJ or the FBI have either buried or redacted or whatever. Like, who knows? All of the Epstein stuff, and we're not going to get conspiratorial, but the question of whether Trump, raped underage girls through the auspices of Jeffrey Epstein, I think is an unanswered question that people on both sides really want to know. And pre-election, there was this big upwelling in the MAGA movement for a release of the Epstein files, which Trump kind of reluctantly promised he would do, and of course has not. There was all this lead up with Pam Bondi claiming she had the client list on her desk and all that sort of thing. We don't have to rehash all of this right now. But, in July, when all of this was kind of breaking anew and pressure was on Trump to do something about Epstein, I think there was this moment where even some of the MAGA faithful thought, well, what's he going to do, right? And why is he not doing more to out the child molesters, essentially, right? The elite child molesters that we have heard so much about. Why doesn't Trump want to release that list? And the Republican Congress adjourns a week early to take the heat off Trump, right? Because I think there was going to be some pressure in Congress to get answers about Epstein, one way or the other, right? Whether it's a client list, whether it's tape from the prison, whether it's just redacted files from the FBI, whatever. But Johnson adjourns early to prevent any of that from coming up in Congress, and that to me is a perfect example of where the GOP kind of steps in and follows suit with Trump to, again, blatantly protect Trump in this case from probing questions, from the truth, from whatever. But why do Republicans, right, who claim to be the party of whatever, family values or Christian values, or, the representatives of MAGA people who care a lot about elite pedophilia, and bringing it to justice, why do they let that go in that moment, right? When there was so much kind of political pressure for this to take off. I don't know.
Well, again, as I've said several times now on this podcast, I think it's because MAGA is a cult.
Yeah.
I think with Epstein, the clearest way to point that out is kind of the immediate feedback people received on the idea that Bill Clinton was in these Epstein files. And, every Democrat or liberal or leftist I've ever talked to, if you said, well, I mean, what about Clinton? He might be in there. The answer is the same. Well, if he is, throw him in jail.
Throw him in jail. Yeah, I don't care
Like,
who's on there. Obama
oh
could
my
be on there.
God,
Throw him in jail.
I'll
Yeah,
have to get rid of my Bill Clinton bumper sticker and T-shirt and button. That doesn't even exist because no one's in a cult for Bill Clinton.
right. Yes.
You know, anyone who's even remotely associated with the goings on of Jeffrey Epstein should be investigated, and if found guilty of pedophilia or sex trafficking of underage girls, thrown in jail for the
Yes.
rest of their lives. I mean,
Yeah.
it's as simple as that. We're talking about pedophilia. There's no defense of it. No one should be equivocating about this, and yet I think because a lot of people know deep down that of all the people associated with Jeffrey Epstein, there's one person that looms larger than everyone else. And said person may or may not be the president of the United States, that we need to kind of equivocate and dance around the subject and recess from Congress early and do this whole song and dance. Um, there's so much that we could say about Epstein, and we probably will say later, but
Yeah.
it's cult behavior. That's what it
It
is.
is. Yeah. Well, it's going to be real interesting to see how they dance around it when they come back into session too. So this is an ongoing thing that I guess we'll see how it plays out. But I think that's the most blatant of all the blatant examples that I can see of kind of the Republican Party being more than happy to forego its stated principles for the sake of this one man and for the sake of the power that this one man seems to bring to the GOP. But of course, this is not the first time that presidents have been protected by their parties, or for that matter, the opposition party.